The last time a trade conflict between two major allies reached this level of tension, it didn't end with a dramatic announcement. It ended quietly, because one side realized the numbers no longer supported the narrative. Keep that in mind before we talk about what just unfolded. Because what you're hearing in the headlines is not the full story. Not even close. If you've been following this situation, stay with me, because the real shift just happened beneath the surface. And if you haven't, this is where it actually starts to matter. Here's what really happened. Behind closed doors, away from cameras and public statements, Washington made a move. Not a loud one. Not something designed for headlines. A quiet outreach, the kind that only happens when internal pressure starts outweighing public confidence. And that alone tells you something important. Because governments don't change tone privately unless the situation publicly is becoming unsustainable. Now look at what was asked. It wasn't a demand for full compliance. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was something far more revealing, a request for partial adjustment. A rollback, but not completely. A pause, but not an end. A joint statement framed as mutual de-escalation. On paper, that sounds reasonable. But in negotiation terms, it means something very specific. When a side asks for shared language to describe a resolution, they are not trying to win outright. They are trying to exit without losing face. And that distinction matters. Because strong positions don't need shared narratives. They impose outcomes. What we saw here was different. Now here's where it gets interesting. The response didn't come with celebration. There was no victory speech. No press conference declaring success. No political theater. Instead, the reply was grounded in something far more difficult to counter, legal framing. Not emotion. Not politics. Law. The conditions were restated exactly as before: remove the contested measures, restore the agreed framework, then negotiate. Not at the same time. In that order. That changes everything. Because once a dispute shifts from political leverage to legal obligation, the tools available to each side change dramatically. Pressure can move markets. It can influence politics. But it cannot rewrite agreements already signed. And the more pressure applied under those conditions, the stronger the legal position becomes for the side holding that line. Now let's talk about what the markets quietly revealed, because markets don't perform for headlines. They react to expectations. When news broke of outreach, markets moved upward. Not because they supported the conflict, but because they assumed it was nearing an end. When it became clear no agreement was reached, that movement reversed. That tells you something very clean. The relief was priced in on one side, and removed when it didn't materialize. That's not speculation. That's signal. And signals like that are difficult to spin. At the same time, something else was happening in the background, something far less visible but far more important. While the public focus remained on tariffs and retaliation, groundwork was being laid elsewhere. New partnerships. Expanded agreements. Alternative supply lines. Quiet diversification. Not announcements. Actions. Because real strategic shifts don't happen in press releases. They happen in contracts, infrastructure, and long-term positioning. And those moves change the equation over time. What looked like dependence at the beginning of this conflict is no longer as absolute as it once was. Which brings us back to the present moment. This isn't just about one negotiation attempt. It's about leverage, and whether it still works the way it was expected to. Right now, there are two possible paths forward. The first is escalation. More pressure. More restrictions. A doubling down designed to force movement. But escalation comes with a cost, and that cost compounds on both sides. The second path is recalibration. A return with terms that align more closely with the framework already on the table. Less emphasis on optics, more on substance. Historically, that path is quieter, less visible, but not uncommon when internal pressures begin to rise. Which path gets chosen will define what happens next. Not just in the immediate term, but in how future disputes are handled between major partners. Because moments like this don't disappear. They set precedent. And precedent shapes behavior long after the headlines move on. So the real question isn't what just happened. It's what happens next. Was that outreach the beginning of a resolution? Or just a pause before something bigger? We'll find out soon. Because in situations like this, the next move doesn't take months. It takes weeks. And when it happens, the real story won't be in the announcement. It'll be in what changed before it.